part of the reason our eyes are the way they are, they have whites. That's an evolved adaptation so that we can see what other people's eyes are up to.
Interesting.
And everyone who didn't have visible whites, either died or was killed or didn't mate. Right? And so I want to see where you're pointing your eyes, because you're devoting a tremendous amount of cortical energy to that value specification. And if I can see what you're pointing your eyes at, then I know what you value. Then I can mimic your body with my body, and we can fall into the same, what would you say, the same
Rhythm.
game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the same rhythm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And you see that in music, right? Because the musicians are heading towards a note. They all know that. They know when they're going to jump up and down in unison and hit that note.
Right.
And then they can play along the way. The music has a point, or you don't even want to listen to it. And it's so satisfying when they hit that climax all together, right? It's like, we got the point, man.
It's true in relationships too, and I think that as we atomize ourselves in our relationships, I think the relationships break down. That you have to have that rhythm, and you also have to have the ability to.
That's why you dance with your partner.
Yeah, that refusal to acknowledge the differences that you have with your partner. And there's a beautiful thing in the beginning of Genesis. So the phrase that's used when it talks about Eve and Adam is before. So it's really fascinating. I mean, the whole thing is really beautifully symbolic. That Eve never receives a name until after they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. She's called just the woman until that point, and then he names her. Right? He first names her, and he says, she will be called Isha, right, which is a derivative of Ish, which is the same word, just add a hey at the end, because that's how he sees her. She's a derivative of him. She's just an object for him to use, and that's why she ends up talking to the snake. Because if you're seen as an object by somebody, why would you want to talk with them? You're not an independent human being, and it's only
that's why you don't want to dance with someone who only has sexual gratification on their mind.
Exactly, and then. She sins, they're kicked out, and then he renames her Eve, right? Adam calls her Eve.
Okay, so
because
hold
she's
on.
the mother of all
the first name is given by who? Adam?
Adam. Yeah, so he's naming all the animals,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And then it says that.
And that's giving them a reality, a semantic reality.
Right, and then God says none of these partners and Adam can't find a partner.
Right, they're not suitable.
And he says, so I'm going to give you a helpmate.
You need a woman, not a dog, not a pet dog.
Exactly. He says you need a helpmate, but the phrase that's used is ezer kenegdo. So it's translated helpmate.
Yeah.
What it actually means is a helper against you.
Oh.
That's what it actually means in Hebrew. Ezer kenegdo, right?
So there's an adversarial element in there.
Yeah, because what makes you a better
this
person is the
called,
adversarial element.
There's this idea in neurophysiology called opponent processing. It's really cool. So if you want to move your hand really smoothly this way, you can do it like that. But it's nowhere near as smooth as if you do this. You can be absolutely precise. So you really tense this hand against this hand, and then this one relents a little bit. It's absolute precision. And so that adversarial process, you imagine that women and men are slightly different temperamentally, or even quite a bit different. Well, you're trying to hit the mark, but the mark moves. And so how do you hit it? Well, you hit it with this adversarial process. And you do that with kids, and when you're negotiating in the house too. It's like, well, you think this, and I think this.
And that's why when you fundamentally refuse to acknowledge the difference between the sexes, you lose the ezer kenegdo part of that. You lose that opposition that's necessary.
That's also, see, my wife has a more masculine temperament than me, and she's really low in politeness, which is an aspect of agreeableness. And it makes her quite formidable as a combatant. And sometimes in our life, she'll say things that are so outrageous that, well, it usually makes me laugh. Like in an intense fight, she'll say like 3 of the worst insults you could possibly imagine, and it'll make me laugh. And it's hard sometimes to deal with her because of this more aggressive element. But it was also something that really attracted me towards her, because she's no pushover, and she's got this she's got a kind of a knife-like sense of humor that comes out quite often. And so I really like the combative element to it. And that's part of what keeps a relationship dynamically alive. So that's very cool. So that's the first name?
So he first calls her Isha, and says, because God's going to give her his ezer kenegdo, and then after the whole element with
and he so God says he's gonna deliver this. What's the word?
Ezer kenegdo, right? So it's a helpmate.
Right, but it's an adversarial partner.
Yeah, the word kenegdo literally means against him. Right?
Wow,
it's going to be Ezer, helper against him, right?
Okay, and then Adam
calls her Isha, right? Because she's flesh of my flesh, she's bone of my bone, which is how a man sees a woman when the woman is just an object to him, right? Because she's mine, right? It's my possessiveness of her that defines her as a human being, and the word woman, just like in English, is a derivative of the word man, right? It's Ish, which is spelled Aleph Yud Shin. It's the same spelling, you just add a hey at the end, and now it's Isha, right? So she's going to be called woman because I'm called man, so she's
she's a secondary derivative.
She's a secondary derivative of me.
Right, which is how a man would understand a woman. It's like she's like me except smaller.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And then once she starts to bear children, then he calls her Chava, right, Eve, the mother, which is the same root of life and Chava, right? Chai is the same root. So it's it
is
means
that
the mother of all.
etymologically related to the word for chaos? You know? In Hebrew?
Hebrew?
Yeah.
Like at
The formless chaos at the beginning of time. Is there a relationship between that and Eve's name?
I don't think so. I'd have to check it. But he says she's the mother of all living, and then that's how she's defined. What gives her a meaning is the thing that actually does give women meaning, and that we as a society
source of all things.
right, is the ability to bear children, which is of course what we as a society have decided to deride and pretend is not a superpower and treat as a secondary aspect of femininity, when it is in fact the primary aspect of femininity. And so it's really it's quite fascinating, and it's really,
that's why I like Beauty and the Beast. Because I taught a lot about hero mythology to my students, and the women would sometimes come up and say, well, what about the female heroes? And I thought, well, that's complicated, because you have the image of Mary, and that's pretty maternal, but in Christianity, Christ is also the redeemer of women, and that's an adventurous hero in some sense. It's like, so the female situation is complicated, right? Because there is this adventurous spirit, but it has to be combined with this maternal fecundity, let's say, and involuntarily. Well, what I really liked about Beauty and the Beast, and I do think that's the best Disney movie ever made, was that it's a real female hero myth. I mean, the woman, Beauty, is beautiful, so she's high up in the female dominance hierarchy, but she's witty and well-read and intelligent and adventurous and brave and courageous and truthful, all of that. And she doesn't fall for Gaston, the psychopathic persona. And young women are much more likely to fall for men like that, by the way, than women who are slightly more, what would you say?
Mature.
Wiser. So they'll fall for dark triad men, and that's partly how psychopathy propagates itself across the generations. Right? They can be enticed by psychopathic personas. But she prefers the Beast. It's like, well, the Beast is the adventure. It's like, well, is this terrible man, like he's rough, he's unhued, but he's got potential, right? And that's what really attracts her. And she wants someone who can guard the walls and make a safe haven for the children, but who's generous enough who's productive enough to be useful and generous enough to share. And so she civilizes him. And that's, you say, well, that's the female hero myth. It's like the civilizing of men is the female hero myth. And the civilizing of nature, in some sense, is the male hero myth.
And to pretend that that's like a secondary pursuit, which is what the society says, that like what we should value is, in a certain way, feminism is a construct of the patriarchy, because
they're completely, and it's modern, guys, because the notion is, well, the men have got it all right, and all we'd have to do is for women to be more like men.
Right, exactly.
That's your aim. My wife is engaged in a series of discussions with this Jonathan Pajot I mentioned earlier. It's an inquiry into the symbolism of the divine feminine, because we have a real question in our culture. We have a more elaborated narrative of, let's say, call it masculine heroism, and a more differentiated sense of masculine totalitarianism as well. The female role is still somewhat undifferentiated, and I think that's partly not acceptable anymore because women have control of the reproductive function now. So a lot of this has to become conscious. It can't just happen automatically.
Right. No, I mean, that's right. And so at a time when the virtues of femininity need to be taught more than ever, they're being taught the opposite more than ever. Because you have to opt into this feature of humanity, where before you didn't have to opt into it. It was going to be forced upon you, right? I mean, as long as you were going to engage in sexual activity, you were going to experience the joys of motherhood, and you were going to have to play this role. But now you no longer have to, which means that you actually have to be taught that there's value in the role in order for you to embrace the role.
And you have to be willing to notice that without seeing that as only part of you in your peculiarity and not as something regressive. Somebody clipped something I said and put it on one of those YouTube shorts. It's like 3 minutes long. It's got, 8 million views or something. And they called it Advice to 19-year-old Women. And so what I said in this brief video was that, okay, so we'll go for another minute, was that I've worked with women as peers my whole life. So I was part of the first generation, I would say, and certainly in my profession in psychology, there's been a plethora of women, certainly since before I entered the field. So I've worked with women as peers my entire life. And I worked, even before that, I worked in the daycare branch of Alberta Social Services. And as a consultant, and that was mostly women too. So, and what I noticed about women, and this I really was struck home to me when I worked with high-end lawyers in Toronto, because I worked with the best law firms in Toronto for 10 years with their best lawyers. They would send them to me and some other people that were involved in this enterprise, and our deal was, we'll increase the efficiency of your high-end lawyers by 10% in terms of billable hours, but we work for them, not you. And so then I had about 15 of lawyers like this come and see me. They were skeptical to begin with, but we got over that pretty quick. And some of it was management discussion, some of it was strategy, some of it was sorting out their marriage, work-life balance. Like, it really depended on the individual, as it should in the therapeutic session. But we had a lot of discussions with the women, because the law firms lost all their women in their early 30s. And the story was always the same. So these women who became these top lawyers, they all had the same story. They're hyper-conscientious and very, very smart. So they were top of junior high, top of high school, top of their class in college, went to a great law school, top law school class, they went to a great law firm, and then they walked through the legal ranks till they hit senior partner. No, like blinders on, like conscientious people will have. I'm going to attain up this pyramid. Then they'd hit 30 or so when they hit 10, senior partner, equivalent of tenured professor. And then they woke up and thought, what the hell am I doing here? I'm working like 80 hours a week, 75 hours a week, flat out. Because you don't get to that level unless you're performing. And you get a call at 2 a.m. from some client in China who's got a corporate merger. It's like, you're awake and on it.
Right.
And you put that on top of everything, or you don't get paid $750 an hour. And you say, well, that's the patriarchy. It's like, no, it's not. It's the market.